Hey, hello, welcome. Today at Prolfeed 101, we're going to do something a little bit different. A ranking of games in a series, from least favorite to most enjoyable. Or, in the case of this trilogy, the least perfect to most. Today we'll be focusing on the Streets of Rage series for the Mega Drive Genesis in a descending list format, because no one has ever done anything like this before on the internet. This is my personal opinion, so it's obviously subjective and purely based on my feelings. So, without further ado, let's get into this thing by cueing the first number in a beefy voice, with tons of reverb. Number 3. As I hinted at just a few moments ago at the top of the show, if you can remember that far back, I consider all three of these Sega Mega Drive Genesis titles to be pretty perfect. Still, it was kind of easy to compile this list, and I'm sure most would agree that the third entry in the Streets of Rage series is the weakest, for a number of reasons. The difficulty is about as inconsistent and ridiculous as the story, with the last couple of stages being, quite frankly, awful. There's a bigger emphasis on the narrative this time around, portrayed through excellent, stylistic cutscenes. They're silly, but fun, though I kinda miss the more grounded nature of the first two titles, as this third and final entry uncharacteristically jumps the shark with a more sci-fi heavy feel. The new characters are also pretty bizarre, with Old Daddy Longlimbs and Captain Kangaroo joining the returning cop cast. The good? Well, the combat and animations are both better than ever, with a wider array of moves and techniques. Blaze is my favorite character across the series and an absolute beast in this one. The mobility and speed are second to none with the addition of run and roll mechanics available with a double tap of a directional button. There's a new power meter that replaces the screen wipe cop car and power move from its respective predecessors, which is a great, fun change as well. Many consider Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima's soundtrack for 3 to be the worst in the series, or even downright awful, but I love it. The experimental nature of some of these original tracks really works for me. The more bizarre and heavy, the better. There are a ton of tunes that sound like proto-dubstep, and the audio fidelity overall is top-notch. There are days that I consider this third game soundtrack to be the best. For more on that, make sure to check out our VGM 101 podcast wherever you get yours. Specifically the first show, as it's entirely focused on these three Streets of Rage games. That one can be found here on YouTube. When it was initially released, my friends and I considered this third entry a massive disappointment. But as I get older, I find myself gravitating to it over the others at times. It's overstuffed and a bit ridiculous, but it's also extremely fun. Japan got the far superior version with Bare Knuckle 3, a much more balanced and consistent affair that includes all of the boss characters. If you have the option, I'd suggest finding a copy of that one instead of the Western release. If that was the version we received in markets over here, it might have even beat out this next entry for the silver spot. The original Streets of Rage, 1991, Sega's answer to Final Fight in a lot of ways. I've probably played through this thing more than all other brawlers combined. It's remarkably fine-tuned for a debut and exudes endless amounts of charm from start to finish. It's perfectly balanced with extremely tight controls and a great soundtrack written and composed by Yuzo Koshiro. These tunes are all on par with some of the best in the series. The Stage 1 theme, Fighting in the Street, is probably my favorite opener of any game in the genre, even beating out the iconic first level track from the second title. I first played Streets of Rage at a friend's house on a Friday night, as I didn't own a Genesis until the release of the second entry. At that point, I had played Final Fight, and it really didn't do much for me. I found the Capcom arcade to be visually stunning and fun in small bursts, but ultimately repetitive and boring. Yeah, I just said it. However, when I got my hands on Streets of Rage and played it co-op in my buddy's basement, I was blown away. We probably played through the entire game half a dozen times that night, in between fistfuls of cold cuts and potato chips. Nostalgia is a weird thing, particularly when it comes to reviewing things from one's childhood, but I can officially state that my love for this game exceeds that of gazing upon it with rose-tinted goggles. Streets of Rage is a classic that is still extremely fun to play, particularly for newcomers to the beat-em-up genre. So, normally when it comes to making lists, I typically find that mine differ a lot compared to others. The second Western Super Mario title is my favorite. I love Zelda 2 and consider the first Mega Man to be tops. However, when it comes to the Streets of Rage series, I feel like I'm with the majority. The second entry is simply the most fun to play overall. Sure, I tend to go back to the first game the most, but when it comes to a pure, polished experience, Streets of Rage 2 is the clear winner. Max is a great new hulking addition, and I'm just going to say it, far better than Adam from the first game. I've tried to play as Adam in Streets of Rage as well as the remake, and I just can't do it. He's like a weaker Axel who controls like a lanky bundle of rigid strings. Max is a big, slow brute, but an excellent variant to the skill sets of the returning protagonists, Axel and Blaze. The The less said about Skate the better, but the point is that this sequel has variety. Our man Yuzo Koshiro returns with possibly his best work ever, even if Go Straight is clearly a blatant ripoff of Inner City's Good Life.
Let me take you to a place I know you wanna go. It's a good life. Hey, 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 yeah. I don't wanna stand around and beg you. Just don't say no. No, 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 no.
Not even trying to hide it. It isn't the first time Koshiro has copied a melody or beat, but it might be the most shameless, closely on the verge of downright plagiarism. Still, he is an excellent mood setter and brilliant composer, with this arguably being his most varied soundtrack as a whole. There's light, jazzy piano sections, experimental electronic ragers, and catchy melodic pieces. It's perfect. Streets of Rage 2 is a blast to play solo or with a friend. The punches and kicks land like a sledgehammer, with the impact nearly resonating through the classic Genesis controllers. The character sprites are well detailed, beautifully animated, and as colorful as the well-drawn, varied backgrounds. Beat-em-up games have the tendency to get a bit repetitive after a while, but Streets of Rage 2 remains engaging until the very end. The combat is fun, easy to learn, but complex enough to punish button mashers from progressing past the opening stages. Everything is just so silky smooth, memorable, and addictive. All three of these games are easy to find for a reasonable price and a great way to have some good old-fashioned fun, especially with a friend, if you have one. In the future, we plan to construct more lists like this, not only relegated to a series of games, but also films, albums, and books. So, if you dig this format, make sure to let us know by commenting, hitting the thumbs up, and subscribing. Also, another reminder to check out our VGM 101 podcast as well, for more earhole excitement.